I was talking to a friend on the phone last night, and she said, oh my God, you're going to South by Southwest? Are you gonna hang out with like rock stars? And I was like, better. Better. I'm gonna hang out with the real badasses, the teachers, for sure. So I'm happy to be here. Thank y'all for having me. I just tell you this. I spoke at South by Southwest last year. Just tell you this. I'm like coming over here, so it's like a secret. So on the way here, I got pulled over, and I had no driver's license. I had no proof of insurance, and I was speeding. And the guy goes, geez, I mean, where are you going? I said, I'm going to give a talk at South by Southwest. And he said, about what? I said, failure. So this morning I rode here with my sister from Houston, and we're going back because we live down the road. And I was like, oh my God. And she said, what? And I said, I'm gonna talk about shame today. There's a chance we're gonna end up naked hitchhiking because this conference may manifest our trip here. I am gonna talk about daring classrooms and what I believe courage looks like and is. So we're gonna start here. So I am sitting on about 200,000 pieces of data that I've collected over the last 15 years. And one of the questions I've had from the beginning of my career was simply this: is courage the willing to show up and be seen, even when we can't control the outcome? Is courage something that's inherent in us, or is it something that we can teach and develop in people and ourselves? And so as both a social worker and a teacher, this is my 21st year in the classroom. I'm very quick to call bullshit when someone says you can't teach something. My first question was, oh, you can't really teach empathy, you have it or you don't. You can't teach courage, either have it or you don't. I'm like, let me talk to a group of teachers about that. Because to me, it's questionable. So what I've learned in the last couple of years is you can absolutely teach courage. You can develop it in yourself and you can develop it in others. And it basically boils down to 4 skill sets. Vulnerability, clarity of values, trust, and what I call rising skills, the ability to get back up when we fall, when we experience setbacks and failures. It's interesting because I didn't think rising skills or resilience was going to be on this list, but as it turns out, the most courageous men and women I've interviewed over the past 15 years talk about their courage only being possible because they know how to get back up when they inevitably fall. And one of the things that's true is that if you're brave enough often enough, you will fall. It's not a question if you might fall, you will, by definition, if you're brave in your classrooms, in your life, with your partners, with your kids, with the people you care about. If you're brave, you're gonna get hurt. I mean, the brokenhearted are the bravest among us because they have the courage to love, right? And so we have to learn how to get back up. So here's what I wanna talk to you about today. I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about vulnerability. I told him, I was like, I'm ready to do my talk, I need 7 hours. I just need to be with my people for a long stretch. What I'm actually gonna talk to you about today is the number one thing that gets in the way of developing courage and building courageous classrooms. We're gonna start with vulnerability, and then I'm gonna talk to you about shame. And I'm gonna tell you why I've decided to talk about shame today. Because I feel really comfortable with you, and I think you're a fearless group of people, and I don't think we can pretend that this is not getting in the way. I don't think we can say, this is not happening in homes, this is not happening in the environment we live in right now. This is part of the landscape, and it's become worse over the last 6 months. And so I wanna talk about it. But let's start with vulnerability, and let's start with the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to really show up and let people in. How many of you were raised to believe that vulnerability is weakness? Most of us. Here's what I can tell you, and I'll challenge you, yell up if you can think of something. I cannot find in 200,000 pieces of data a single example of courage that was not completely defined by vulnerability. Let me challenge you. Can you think of one courageous thing that you have seen someone do in your life that did not require vulnerability, that did not require uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. One thing. I find zero evidence. And let me tell you, I've stood in front of a group like this of special force military people. They can't think of a single example of courage that did not require absolute vulnerability. But we hate vulnerability because it opens us up to being hurt. And we think, I don't want to be vulnerable because vulnerability, where's my slideshow? There it is the center of shame and scarcity and fear and anxiety and grief and disappointment. So I am going to armor up and self-protect. I'm not going to let people hurt me, see me, take advantage of me. The problem is that when we armor up like that, not only is vulnerability certainly the center of these experiences, it's also the center of these: love and belonging and joy. No vulnerability, no love, no belonging, no joy. What do you think is the most vulnerable human affect we experience? What's the hardest emotion for us to handle as humans? Joy. How many of you are parents? How many of you have ever stood over your child while they're sleeping and thought, oh my God, I love you like so much I can't breathe? And then in that split second, pictured something horrific happening to your child. How many of you have done that? It should be 95% of you. And this is a perfect example of that. Many years ago, when I first was studying this concept of foreboding joy, this fear we have about being joyful, I was on date night with my husband, and we come home and I see the light still on in the kids' bedroom. I'm like, circle the block till they're tucked in, circle the block. So we get some like TCBY yogurt or something. We come back, everyone's tucked in. I'm like, okay, this is awesome, let's go. And I remember we parked our car on the curb by our house, and we're walking in, and the song on the radio when we got out of the car was like one of my favorite songs, Little River Band. Do you remember the song? Like, Friday night, it was late, I was walking you home, we got down to the gate, and I was dreaming of the night. And I remember like, oh my God, this is like amazing. And we were holding hands. And I go, oh my God. And she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, do you ever think like someone's gonna jump out from behind the bushes and shoot us down? And he's like, no. Did you see somebody? And I said, no, I'm just saying, like when things are going really well, you're waiting for like that to happen. Yes or no? Yes. And he's like, no. And I was like, yeah, because here's the thing. I would hope the babysitter would come out and like move us so the kids didn't find us. And he's like, oh my God, Brené. No, and I'm serious. And I don't even think on the list, it was like, I should put like a whole, like, if you need to call us, if we get killed in the front yard, like something so they know to call my mom and keep the kids in the house. And he's like, he goes, I'm guessing date night's over. I'm like, oh, hell yeah, date night's over. I'm like, we gotta come up with a list, a plan. But am I alone in this? Right, because joy is so, and I'll just share this with you. What was the one variable men and women who had the capacity to lean heavily into joy? What was the one variable they shared in common? This should be a pedagogy of itself. What is the one variable that people who can really lean into joy share in common? It is part of vulnerability, but it's actually a practice. Gratitude. The only variable that really separates men and women who cannot lean into joy, who start dress rehearsing tragedy, and the reason we dress rehearse tragedy is so we can beat vulnerability to the punch. So what we do is like, oh, this great thing's happening. I'm gonna start picturing worst case scenario so that when I get hurt and it happens, I'm all prepared for it, right? But how many of you think we can actually prepare for that? You cannot. 50% of the people in this room have probably experienced the thing that we dress rehearse, and they could come up here one at a time and tell you, you can practice that all you want. That will do nothing to help you when that moment comes. The only thing you're doing is squandering the joy that you need that builds a reservoir for when hard things happen. So as it turns out, our bodies really neurobiologically experience joy as vulnerability and threat, and we quiver. And so some of us use the quiver as a warning sign to start thinking about terrible things, and others use that quiver as a reminder to be grateful. to stop on the sidewalk in that moment and say, I'm really grateful for this date night. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our time together. But that's harder, right? Than to go, have you ever pictured someone? So love, belonging, and joy. Absolute vulnerability. But also these things, courage, empathy, trust, innovation, and creativity. No vulnerability, no innovation, no creativity. My favorite call that I get, hey Brené, would you like to speak to our brand new startup in Silicon Valley? It's amazing, and we loved your TED Talk, and we're bringing in thought leaders, and we want to shape our culture. And okay, great, that sounds fun. What do you want me to talk about? Anything but vulnerability and shame. I got nothing. No vulnerability, no creativity, no innovation. Accountability, adaptability to change, hard conversations. I mean, this is an easy question. How many of you think where you work, your school, your district, your grade level, how many of you think where you work would be better if people had a stronger skill set about having real, honest, respectful, hard conversations? Yes or no? Yeah, everybody. We dodge those and they become toxic in our culture. Feedback, problem solving, and ethical decision making all require vulnerability. They all require, one of my favorite stories, I'm in Canary Wharf in London talking to 150 hedge fund managers about vulnerability. They're required to attend. It was like Brooke Brothers threw up in the room. And I'm uncomfortable because I'm like, wow, these people look hostile. All men, all white, and all not happy to be there. And so I only get like 5 minutes in before someone's like, excuse me, we don't know why you're here. We're bankers, we're high compliance driven, we don't do vulnerability. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know why I'm here either. I haven't even ridden the London Eye. There's so many things I want to do. I'm not sure either. I said, why am I here actually? Like, what are you up against right now? And they're like, we're a high compliance banking industry. Our biggest problem right now is ethical decision making. How many of you in this room right now have ever tried to make an ethical, right decision in the face of a group moving the other direction? You will piss off some people. Yes or no? There's probably nothing more vulnerable than standing up in front of a group of people that you respect, that you work with, that you like, that you feel a sense of belonging with, and saying, this is not the right thing to do. So vulnerability is the birthplace of everything we want more of in our lives. The problem is that we end up here. Instead of having an open heart, we end up with a closed heart. We end up with a protected heart for a lot of different reasons. Some of them are environmental. Let me tell you this for sure. The greatest casualty of trauma is vulnerability. The worst thing we lose in trauma is vulnerability. And let's be very clear about what constitutes trauma. Racism is trauma. Poverty is trauma. Classism, trauma. Homophobia, heterosexism, trauma. And so the biggest casualty of that is I can't be vulnerable. Well, when vulnerability, the ability to really be who we are, becomes a realm of only the privileged, we have lost our capacity to create a school, a home, and a country that we love. Period. Period. So there are those of us who will fight the big fight on the outside, but in no way can we give up the fight on the inside. You can make your classroom, and to some degree, if you have a collective group of brave, badass people, a whole school, but certainly in a classroom, you can, and I have seen it done many times, you can create a culture of courage within a classroom that can be the only space a child has, or an adult, even in a college classroom, I only teach graduate level, MSW, PhD, that's it. You can create a space in that classroom if you're willing to be excruciatingly uncomfortable and vulnerable. That may be the only space that student has to take the armor off his or her heart. But the one thing that will kill it faster than anything else, the one betrayal of vulnerability, is shame. That cannot happen in that classroom.